The dust-laden wind whipped across Meredith Rowe's gaunt face as she collapsed onto the hard, packed dirt of Cripple Creek's Main Street, her trembling fingers still clutching the locket containing her late husband's portrait. 3 days without food had finally taken their toll, leaving the 26-year-old widow too weak to continue her desperate search for work in the booming Colorado mining town of 1891. Isaac Northcott pulled his horse to an abrupt halt, the animal's hooves kicking up clouds of dust as he narrowly avoided trampling the fallen woman. The 30-year-old cowboy had been riding into town after months on a cattle drive, his saddlebags heavy with pay and his mind occupied with thoughts of a hot bath and warm meal at the local hotel. But the sight of the collapsed woman jolted him from his reverie. "Madam," he called, dismounting with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. When she didn't respond, he knelt beside her, noting the threadbare quality of her dress and the alarming thinness of her wrist as he checked for a pulse. She was alive, but barely. Without hesitation, Isaac scooped her into his arms, surprised by how little she weighed. With careful movements, he lifted her onto his horse, arranging her limp form securely in the saddle before mounting behind her. One arm wrapped protectively around her waist as he guided his horse toward Doc Miller's office at the edge of town. Meredith awoke to unfamiliar surroundings, the softness of clean sheets a stark contrast to the hard ground she'd grown accustomed to sleeping on since being evicted from her small rented room 3 weeks prior. Her eyes fluttered open to reveal whitewashed walls and the scent of carbolic soap that marked a physician's quarters. "You're awake," said a gentle voice, and Meredith turned to find an elderly man with kind eyes watching her from a chair beside the bed. "I'm Dr. Miller. You collapsed from hunger in the street yesterday. Lucky for you, Mr. Northcott brought you in before things got worse." "Mr. Northcott?" Meredith's voice came out as a rasp. "The cowboy who found you. He's been waiting outside most of the night, refusing to leave until he knew you'd pull through." The doctor handed her a cup of water. "He paid for your care too, though he asked me not to mention that part." Meredith sipped the water gratefully, shame coloring her cheeks. "I can't accept charity." "Once I'm well enough, I'll work to repay him," Dr. Miller chuckled. "You might want to tell him that yourself. He's been mighty insistent about helping." As if summoned by their conversation, a knock sounded at the door. When the doctor called for the visitor to enter, Meredith found herself looking at the tallest, most weather-beaten man she'd ever seen. His face was tanned from years under the sun, with lines around his eyes that deepened as he smiled uncertainly at her. "Madam," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair with flecks of silver at the temples. "Glad to see you're awake, Mr. Northcott," she acknowledged, clutching the blanket tighter around herself, acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. "The doctor tells me I owe you my thanks." "Isaac, please, and no thanks needed." He shifted uncomfortably. Anyone would have done the same. But they hadn't, Meredith thought. She'd been struggling in Cripple Creek for weeks since the pneumonia had taken her husband, and not a soul had offered genuine help until now. "I'll repay you," she insisted, struggling to sit up, "for the doctor's fee and any other expenses." Isaac raised a hand to stop her. "No need for that. But if you don't mind me asking, what brought you to such a state? A lady like yourself shouldn't be starving in the streets." Meredith finished with a bitter smile. "My husband died in the mines 3 months ago. The company provided no compensation, claiming he'd violated safety protocols. By the time I paid for his burial, there was nothing left." The doctor cleared his throat. "Mrs. Rowe needs rest, Mr. Northcott." "Perhaps you could continue this conversation tomorrow," Isaac nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "Of course. Madam, I'll check on you tomorrow if that's acceptable." After he left, Meredith sank back against the pillows, exhaustion claiming her once more. Her last thought before sleep took her was of the unexpected kindness in the cowboy's eyes. True to his word, Isaac returned the next day, and the next. He brought food from the hotel restaurant, hearty stews and fresh bread that helped Meredith regain her strength. During his visits, she learned he was a cattle driver who'd been working the trails between Texas and Colorado for 15 years, saving every penny with dreams of purchasing his own small ranch someday. "I've almost got enough," he told her on the third day, his eyes brightening as he spoke of green pastures and clear streams on a plot of land he'd been eyeing near the foothills. One more good season should do it. Meredith found herself drawn to his quiet strength and unassuming manner. Unlike many men she'd encountered in the rough mining town, Isaac spoke to her with respect, his eyes never straying inappropriately. His words never crossing into unwelcome territory. By the fifth day, Dr. Miller declared Meredith fit to leave his care, but this presented a new problem. She had nowhere to go. Mrs. Dolan at the boarding house might have room, Isaac suggested when she confessed her predicament. "I could speak with her on your behalf. And how would I pay for room and board?" Meredith asked, frustration evident in her voice. "I've tried every business in town for work. No one's hiring, at least not for jobs a respectable woman can take." Isaac frowned, clearly understanding her implication. The saloons were always looking for female employees, but such work often demanded more than serving drinks. "What skills do you have, Mrs. Rowe?" "Meredith, please," she corrected, then sighed. "I can read and write better than most. I kept the books for my father's store back in Missouri before I married. I can sew, cook, clean." She trailed off, listing the domestic skills that had proven insufficient to secure employment. Isaac was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "The ranch I'm heading to Carson's place. About 20 miles south, they're short-handed in the house since Mrs. Carson passed last winter. The old man's been looking for someone to cook for the hands and keep the place tidy. It's honest work with room and board included." Hope flickered in Meredith's chest, quickly dampened by practicality. "I have no way to get there and no references." "I'm heading that way tomorrow," Isaac said, "and my word carries weight with Mr. Carson. I've worked his drives for 10 years. The next morning found Meredith seated behind Isaac on his horse, her few possessions bundled in a small package tied to the saddle. The closeness required by their shared mount brought a flush to her cheeks, but necessity overcame propriety. They rode in companionable silence for much of the journey, the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath them almost hypnotic. "Why are you helping me?" Meredith finally asked as they stopped to rest by a clear stream around midday. "You don't know me." Isaac took a long drink from his canteen before answering. "My mother was widowed young like you. 5 children and no means to support us after my pa died in a stampede. If not for the kindness of neighbors, we wouldn't have survived." He met her eyes directly. "Sometimes a person just needs a fair chance." The Carson Ranch sprawled across a verdant valley, its main house a solid 2-story structure with a wide porch overlooking corrals and outbuildings. Cattle dotted the distant hillsides, and the sounds of men working carried on the breeze. As they approached, an elderly man with a shock of white hair emerged from the house, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. "Northcott, didn't expect you back so soon," he called, his gaze shifting to Meredith with undisguised curiosity. "Mr. Carson," Isaac greeted, helping Meredith dismount before swinging down himself. "This is Mrs. Meredith Rowe. I mentioned your need for household help and she's interested in the position." Harold Carson studied Meredith with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Can you cook, Mrs. Rowe?" "Yes, sir, and clean, mend, and keep accounts if needed." "HMPH. Educated, are you?" "My father believed in schooling for daughters as well as sons," she replied evenly. The old rancher's weathered face cracked in a smile. "Good. Too many fools around here already." "Rooms upstairs, end of the hall. Kitchen needs attention, something fierce. Hands will be in for supper at 6. Think you can manage?" Meredith glanced at Isaac, who gave her an encouraging nod. "Yes, Mr. Carson, I can manage." The kitchen proved challenging but not impossible. Years of bachelor living had left it in disarray. But by 6 o'clock, Meredith had prepared a respectable meal of beans, cornbread, and stewed apples from the root cellar stores. The ranch hands ate, weather-beaten men of varying ages eyed her curiously, but were uniformly polite, particularly after Isaac introduced her as a friend who's doing us all a favor by saving us from our own cooking. That night, alone in her small but clean room, Meredith allowed herself to feel hope for the first time since Thomas's death. She had shelter, food, and honest work. She'd repay Isaac's kindness somehow, she resolved as sleep claimed her. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Meredith rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the men, spent mornings cleaning and organizing the neglected house, and afternoons baking or mending. She discovered that Mr. Carson, for all his gruff exterior, was a fair employer who appreciated her efforts to bring order to his household. Isaac, she learned, had his own small cabin near the bunkhouse, preferring its privacy to the communal living of the other hands. He often joined Mr. Carson for evening meals in the main house, where Meredith served them before retiring to eat in the kitchen, a separation of classes she accepted as the natural order. But Isaac frequently found reasons to visit the kitchen afterwards, ostensibly for coffee or leftover dessert, but increasingly just to talk. Meredith found herself looking forward to these quiet conversations, during which they shared stories of their pasts and dreams for their futures. "Do you miss your husband terribly?" Isaac asked one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, the spring twilight deepening outside the windows. Meredith considered the question carefully. "I miss not being alone," she admitted. "Thomas was a good man, but our marriage was more practical than passionate. We'd known each other since childhood, and marrying seemed the natural course." She traced the wood grain of the table with one finger. When the mine opened in Cripple Creek, he saw opportunity. "I saw danger but followed him anyway. And now I wonder what shape my life will take." She looked up at him. "What about you? No wife waiting somewhere?" Isaac shook his head. "Never found the right woman, or perhaps never stayed in one place long enough to look properly." He smiled, but there was a wistfulness to it that tugged at Meredith's heart. As spring blossomed into summer, Meredith's position at the ranch solidified. Mr. Carson raised her wages after the first month, commenting gruffly that he'd forgotten what it was like to live in a properly kept house. The ranch hands treated her with a respect that bordered on reverence after she nursed two of them through a bout of influenza without complaint. And Isaac became the friend she hadn't realized she desperately needed. He brought her wildflowers when he returned from checking the herd, sat with her on the porch on warm evenings, and truly listened when she spoke of her hopes and fears. "I'm saving too," she confided one July evening as they watched heat lightning dance across distant mountains. "Maybe someday I'll have enough to open a small shop in town, sewing or baking perhaps." "You do well at either," Isaac said, his voice warm with admiration. "You've got clever hands." The comment, innocent as it was, brought heat to Meredith's cheeks. She'd become increasingly aware of Isaac as a man, his broad shoulders, the gentle strength of his hands, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Such thoughts felt like a betrayal of Thomas's memory, but they persisted nonetheless. August brought the cattle drive to market, taking Isaac and most of the hands away for 3 weeks. Meredith was surprised by how deeply she felt his absence, how the house seemed emptier without his evening visits to the kitchen. When a sudden afternoon thunderstorm coincided with their expected return, she found herself watching the road anxiously, fear gnawing at her as lightning split the sky. She spotted them through sheets of rain bedraggled, mud splattered but whole. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by confusion at the intensity of her emotion. She busied herself preparing hot coffee and stew, determined to maintain the proper distance between herself and the ranch hand who had become more important to her than was wise. But when Isaac appeared in the kitchen doorway, water dripping from his slicker, his face lighting up at the sight of her, Meredith knew her heart was no longer entirely her own. "You're back," she said unnecessarily, hands clutching her apron. Promised I would be, he replied, removing his hat. Something in his eyes made her breath catch. Thought about you every day, Meredith. Before she could respond, the other hands crowded into the kitchen, breaking the moment with their boisterous demands for coffee and food. Isaac retreated, and Meredith turned to her duties, her mind whirling with unspoken words. The following day, Mr. Carson summoned Isaac and Meredith to his study, a book-lined room he rarely used, but maintained out of respect for his late wife's love of reading. The old rancher settled behind his desk, regarding them both with an inscrutable expression. "Drive went well," he said to Isaac. "Prices were good. Your shares substantial this time." "Thank you, sir," Isaac replied, clearly puzzled by the formal setting for what was usually a straightforward transaction. "Reckon you'll have enough now for that property you've been eyeing," Carson continued. "Spoke to Jenkins in town yesterday. He's still willing to sell." Isaac straightened, excitement visible in his stance. "That's good news, sir." Carson turned his attention to Meredith. "Mrs. Rowe, you've proven yourself valuable to this household. I'd like to offer you a permanent position with increased wages." "Thank you, Mr. Carson," Meredith said, genuinely touched by the offer. "I'm grateful for your confidence." The old man leaned back in his chair, eyes moving between them. "However, I suspect you both might have other plans brewing. I'm not blind, you know, seeing how you look at each other." Meredith felt heat rise to her face while Isaac shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Sir, I haven't spoken improperly to Mrs. Rowe," Isaac began, but Carson waved him off. "Never said you did. You're both free adults. And Mrs. Rowe's mourning period, by even the strictest standards, is near its end." He fixed Isaac with a stern look. "What I'm saying, Northcott, is that if you're planning to establish your own place, you might consider whether you want to do it alone." With that surprisingly delicate hint, Carson dismissed them, leaving Meredith and Isaac standing awkwardly in the hallway, unable to meet each other's eyes. "Would you walk with me?" Isaac finally asked, gesturing toward the door. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the ranch in golden light as they strolled toward a large cottonwood tree by the creek, a spot where Meredith often came to read on her rare afternoons off. Neither spoke until they reached its shade. "Mr. Carson wasn't wrong," Isaac said at last, his voice low. "About how I look at you." Meredith's heart hammered in her chest. "No," she agreed softly, "he wasn't. I never meant to develop feelings for a widow still in mourning. It wasn't proper." "My husband has been gone nearly 6 months," Meredith said. "And while I'll always honor his memory, my heart." She took a deep breath. "My heart seems to have ideas of its own." Isaac moved closer, not touching her but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I'm buying that land. It's good land, 160 acres with year-round water and fine grazing. The cabin needs work, but it's sound." "It sounds wonderful," she said, meaning it. "It's lonely work ranching on your own," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "A man needs a partner. Someone to share the burdens and the joys." Meredith found herself trembling slightly. "Are you asking me something, Isaac?" He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I know it's soon. I know you might need more time. But I've never been more certain of anything than I am of my feelings for you, Meredith Rowe. When I saw you that day in Cripple Creek, something told me my life was about to change." "You couldn't have known that," she whispered. "I was just a starving widow in the street." "No," he said firmly. "You were never just anything. You're the strongest, most determined woman I've ever met. You're kind and clever and beautiful, and He paused, gathering courage. "I've fallen in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and transformative. Meredith felt tears spring to her eyes, not of sorrow, but of a joy so unexpected she hardly knew how to contain it. "I think I've fallen in love with you too," she admitted, her voice breaking, "and it terrifies me." "Why?" he asked gently. "Because I've already lost one husband. Because life out here is harsh and unpredictable. Because good fortune never seems to last." Isaac released one of her hands to brush a tear from her cheek. "I can't promise you forever. No one can, but I can promise to cherish every day we're given. To work alongside you, to respect you, to build something lasting together." His voice deepened with emotion. "I'm asking you to marry me, Meredith, not out of pity or convenience, but because I believe we could have a good life together." Meredith closed her eyes, listening to the rustle of leaves above them and the distant lowing of cattle. When she'd collapsed in that dusty street months ago, she'd thought her life was ending. Instead, it had been beginning anew. "Yes," she said, opening her eyes to find him watching her with such tenderness it nearly undid her. "Yes, I'll marry you." His smile transformed his weathered face, years seeming to fall away as he tentatively pulled her into an embrace. When his lips met hers, gentle and questioning at first, then with growing confidence as she responded, Meredith felt the last shadows of her grief recede, replaced by the warm light of possibility. They married 2 weeks later in the small church in the nearest town, with Mr. Carson giving the bride away and the ranch hands serving as enthusiastic witnesses. Meredith wore a simple blue dress she'd sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Isaac, scrubbed and nervous in his best shirt, stumbled over his vows but spoke them with such sincerity that several of the hardened cowboys were seen wiping suspiciously at their eyes. The cabin on their new land was indeed sound but basic, 2 rooms with a stone fireplace, a hand-dug well nearby, and a small barn that had seen better days. They arrived as the sun was setting on their wedding day, Isaac insisting on carrying Meredith across the threshold despite her laughing protests. "It's not much," he said apologetically as he set her down in what would be their home. "Not yet, anyway." Meredith turned in a slow circle, taking in the rough-hewn walls, the simple furniture Isaac had acquired, the bundles of their combined possessions waiting to be unpacked. Through the window, she could see rolling grassland stretching toward distant mountains, cattle already grazing on what was now their land. "It's everything," she said, turning back to her husband, the words still new and wonderful in her mind. "It's a beginning." Their first year was hard, as beginnings often are. They worked from dawn until dusk, Isaac with the cattle and the endless tasks of maintaining a ranch, Meredith turning the cabin into a home while also tending a vegetable garden, preserving food for winter, and helping with the livestock when needed. They faced drought, illness, and the 1,000 natural challenges of frontier life. But they faced them together, finding strength in partnership that neither had known alone. And in the quiet evenings when work was done and they sat together by the fire, they discovered the deep joy of being truly known and loved by another soul. When their first child, a daughter they named Hope, arrived the following spring, Isaac wept unashamedly as he held her, marveling at the tiny fingers and the perfect miracle of her existence. "She's beautiful," he whispered, looking from the baby to Meredith with awe. "Like her mother." Meredith, exhausted but radiant, reached up to touch his face. "She has your eyes," she said softly, "and hopefully your kind heart." As Hope grew, so did their ranch and their family. A son joined them 2 years later, followed by twin girls the year after that. Their herd increased, and they added onto the cabin until it became a proper house with rooms for the children, and even a small library filled with books Meredith ordered from Denver. 10 years after the day, Isaac had found a starving widow collapsed in the street and lifted her into his saddle without a word. They stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over land that had flourished under their care. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come along that day?" Meredith asked, leaning against her husband's solid presence. Isaac's arm tightened around her waist. "Providence," he said simply. "Some things are meant to be." Meredith thought of all the coincidences and choices that had brought them to this moment: Thomas's decision to seek work in the mines, her own desperate journey to Cripple Creek, Isaac's timely arrival in town after months on the trail. 1,000 things could have gone differently, yet here they were. "I used to think losing Thomas was the end of everything," she said quietly. "I couldn't imagine finding happiness again." Isaac turned her gently to face him, his eyes reflecting the same devotion they had shown on their wedding day. "And now," Meredith smiled, thinking of their children, their home, the life they'd built from nothing but hard work and hope. "Now I know it was just the beginning of our story." As twilight deepened into night, they called the children in for supper, moving through the familiar routine of family life with the easy rhythm of those who have found their place in the world together. And if anyone passing by had looked through the windows of the warm, lamp-lit house on the prairie, they would have seen not the desperate widow and lonely cowboy of years past, but a family bound by love that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a dusty street long ago.